I got this. Okay. All right. I would like to welcome you all to the Dharma Warrior podcast, episode 6. I'm here with my good friend Kalavati Devi, or Dr. Christie Smirl, as you may all know her. Very excited for today's podcast. It's going to be on the subject of Bhakti, the most sacred love. And for anyone who hasn't yet seen it, you can go to the Dharma Warrior blog at dharmawarrior.net, and you can see the article that Kalavati has recently written for you all there on that subject, entitled Bhakti, Sacred Love. And so that's going to be the subject of our little meeting here today. And I'm quite excited to be here. And how are you doing today, Kalavati?
Very good. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be back and talk about one of my favorite subjects.
I am quite excited to have you here. Just get a little closer. There we go. Okay, so where should we begin? I guess perhaps on my other computer here that's just off to the side, I will just open up the blog post so that maybe is there anything that you wanted to say about Bhakti in general, just to open up, or maybe we can give a general sort of definition of what is Bhakti yoga?
Sure. So when we study the different paths of yoga, a lot of times we understand that there's 4 different types of paths, depending on what type of lineage you're looking at. But we have, the yoga of knowledge, or jnana, knowledge-based yoga. And then we have karma yoga, action-based yoga. But one of the limbs specifically is bhakti yoga. And bhakti yoga has its own unique pathway and ability to take us into our deep spiritual nature, I believe, much differently than the other paths of yoga.
Okay, great. And so I guess we will just get right into the article here, and I will sort of just give a brief reading through the introduction, and then once we get to you start breaking down into different sort of methods of devotion within bhakti yoga, or different forms of bhakti yoga. And perhaps at that point we'll just sort of stop at each one, and you can elaborate on your ideas as we proceed. Okay,
Sounds good.
great. So, one second. Phone might even be easier, so I don't have to move. I recently smashed my cell phone this week, so I'm working with my mom's old coral pink iPhone 5 that doesn't have a SIM card here, but it does have a beautiful sticker of Ganesh that I received from the Black Market Boutique in lovely downtown Halifax, which I love to haunt and take all of their little stickers of the various deities and such. So I'm not going to knock on the coral pink loaner phone because it's getting me by for now.
Yeah, so while you're pulling that up, if you want, I can start going over the article that was published. And, when somebody asked me to write about bhakti, and when I try to explain what is bhakti, the first thing that comes to mind is it's a very personal, experiential process. It's not necessarily something that can be taught or learned from reading a book. It's something that has to be done through experience. And that's one of the reasons why when I talk about bhakti, it's to love for love's sake and to surrender to divinity. It's sometimes confused with a lot of ritualistic or mechanical processes that have to be done just right. But I believe that when we surrender to the process of bhakti, we become what I like to call drunk on God.
Hmm. Yes, that's a lovely concept, and I'm really happy to have you here today to discuss the subject of said drunkenness. Just because I find your art and your music quite inspiring, and as you know, yeah. So I've prepared a little selection of my favorite uh, pieces that you've been sharing with me recently. There's so many to go through that maybe I'll um, perhaps add a few more in time. But for now, I've chosen kind of a selection of your recent work, as well as some of your music to share with my followers. And so, yeah, we'll go through your article here, and then we were planning on, yeah, just sharing a song and then sharing some of Kalavati's artwork after that. So I'm going to just begin here with her article, Bhakti, the Most Sacred Love, from which you can find on dharmawarrior.net. And so it begins. Bhakti is to love for love's sake and to surrender to divinity. Bhaj is to adore or worship God. The beautiful, indescribable path of devotion cultivates a transformative peace, stability of mind, strength, and inspirational bliss. Bhakti is much more than singing or chanting the holy names. There are countless forms of bhakti. Let's take a look at 9 types of devotional sadhana. Sravana, Smarana, Archana, Vandana, Padasavana, Dasya, Sakya, Kirtana, and Atma Nivadana. So, to begin, Sravana is listening to the scriptural stories, attending satsang, or hearing messages from a true guru. And what would you like to say about Sravana on that topic?
Well, I think when sometimes we study spirituality or we learn about sacred scriptures, we approach it from a analytical standpoint. And when we're looking at it as a form of bhakti, one of my favorite things a teacher told me once is read the story or listen to the sacred story with the ears and a mind of a child rather than, trying to put in all these hard definitions. But when we're doing this type of form of bhakti, I think it's important to listen to the message so that we can get a renewed sense of our connection to the divinity.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. That and I think that that is generally something within both yoga and spirituality. Sorry, spirituality in general, is that you can sort of get lost in technicality if you want to, or you can get lost in scriptures and lost in just all of those little specificities or whatever you want to call it. But there's also, yeah, bhakti or devotion, which is the personal method of connecting with the divine, which I guess every spiritual practitioner has their own sort of version of that, or their own way that they come to express their own longing for connection or something, right? Because yoga, meaning union, um, is the technology or the tool that we use, and bhakti is like our bhakti is like our method or the fuel, almost, in that sense, right? It is
Um, and
the
I think, like you're saying, it's really important for people to have multiple ways of approaching bhakti because not everybody's a singer, not everybody's an artist, and so when we take a look at these different types of devotional sadhana, people can really find their own angle that works for them and connects them in. Because, like, I've personally felt that bhakti is one of the most powerful or experiential forms of yoga. So, when we look at the difference between, let's take Shvarana, or if we take Smarana, they're all fixing the mind onto God in some way, whether we're listening and fixing our mind onto the story being told, whether we are going through the process of remembering it. So sometimes when we're in the process of smarana, we're going through this process of fixing the mind or creating a memorization or a repetition in the mind. So when we take a look at bhakti in the form of japa, many times when we're doing japa, maybe we do 108 rounds and we've fixed our mind onto that aspect of divinity or God, that emanation. But when we start moving into deeper fixation of the mind, we start getting processes, not just the 108, but things like ajapa japa, where the mantra is constantly playing in the back of the mind. And this is important in the form of bhakti, because when we start developing vitiations of the mind, or when we become distracted by things that are disturbing of the mind, or starting an abnormal conditioning of the mind, when we constantly go back to fixing our mind on divinity, it begins to nullify and eradicate those abnormal vibrations of the mind.
Um, and I was going to say, when we got on the topic of just how important it is for people to have or to find their own individual way of expressing bhakti, that everyone, or as you're saying, not everyone is a singer, not everyone is a painter or a writer, but everyone has something that makes them feel connected or makes them feel more like themselves. And those are the things that can sort of draw us toward finding our own expression of devotion, right? What are those things that make us feel connected, and seeking those out and finding more ways of exploring those spaces within the mind and the being. um shall we, I guess, move on to Smarana?
Well, we looked at that one. That would be fixing the mind on forms of bhakti through memorization of sacred literature or mantra. So we could move on to arkana, the third form. So arkana is a very unique form of.
I hadn't realized that. Sorry, that you had actually read through that entire part, or basically covered it. Yes. Sorry. So yeah, just go on to Arcana.
Yeah, no worries. So arkana would be a third type of bhakti, and this is much more of a visual or internal visual process where we are fixing our mind or giving our worship to images of divinity. So that could be like a murti, a physical representation. It could be more of a yantra, like a sacred geometry visualization of a form of divinity. Or it could be mental images that you hold still in your mind or fix upon in your mind. Or it could even include the process of creating sacred art.
Hmm. Okay. So yeah, um, is there anything else that you wanted to say about that? I personally find yantras and visual art to be one of my, I guess, primary methods um, of magic and mysticism, I guess, in a way. Like I'll take an idea and I try to embody it into an image, whether that involves geometric shapes or various icons that draw my mind to certain ideas of the divine or certain aspects of the divine, and try to capture an image of that, so that and so that almost when you're or when I will be creating said images, you're also creating a sacred space within, as you, and then when you return to those images, it allows you to more easily return to that space that you've created and encapsulated within this almost anchor to that place and that time that you've created, right? Is the way that I sort of see the use of sigils and yantras in a creative way, or the way that I personally use it.
Yeah, and I think that when we're using sacred art, there's so much that we can pack into the meaning. And sometimes it's a very individualistic meaning, or sometimes it's a standardized representation. So, if we take, for instance, back before there was common written texts, there were more oral stories passed down through tradition. But even a murti, so if we take a beautiful image of Ganesha, we have very specific symbolism that helps us connect into the meaning and the empowerments of that particular intelligence. So we have the big elephant ears for listening, and the small elephant mouth for speaking less, and the broken tusk and the sweet and the mouse. And so we have all this symbolism that is steeped with story and meaning. So sometimes just gazing upon an image can bring us deep into a devotional state or a connection state with that particular energy, intelligence, or sacred being. Yeah, and I personally, I have a lot of arcana in my practice, but I like to look at all the different forms of bhakti from this particular standpoint, because everybody has, or at least for myself, some days I'm more in an art format, drawing. Some days I'm more into a looking at, a studying, a listening to mode. Sometimes I'm more into a bhakti kirtana mode. So it kind of depends on where we are that particular day and season and how it serves us best. But I think that one of the most important things is for people to find how bhakti works for them, how they work with bhakti, and then latch on to it.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm just looking here, looking ahead, and as we get into Vandana, it says here, Vandana is paying homage, and Kirtan is group praise of Godhood, or sorry, Godhead, often thought through. Pardon me, I'm going to just back up. Vandana is paying homage, and Kirtana is group praise of Godhead, often through ecstatic song and dance. And then you say, I'll never forget the time I attended a church around the corner from my mom's house when I was about 7 years old. They were hollering, clapping, weeping, dancing, and rolling on the ground in devotion. The incredible energy overwhelmed me with tears, and I found a new sense of hope and connection. So here we're starting to get into some other forms of bhakti in the form of song and dance. And that's I guess interesting, for me, a pretty funny story. We don't have really holy rollers in Canada. I don't think. We do have some religious sects of sorts for sure, but I've never witnessed the holy rollers or the snake handling Christians. I know that that's a thing in some places in the States. I've seen that. That's a particularly interesting form of bhakti to me. But anyway, I don't know. Is there anything you would like to say, I guess, about Vandana or Kirtana?
Yeah, I think that, when we infuse our life with the celebration of divinity, it becomes more apparent in our daily lives and it begins to take over even our most mundane activities. You know, when we do kirtana, it's nice because we're doing it usually in a group setting. There might be dancing, there may be singing, might be just chanting, but there's something that happens in a group of two or more people sometimes when giving ourselves over to the process of bhakti. And literally, you can begin to feel the spirit, that energy, that mysticism, that magic move through you. For instance, this was one of the first times that I had ever experienced a form of group bhakti. And it doesn't have to be any particular religion or spiritual practice. It can be bhakti in a Christian church, in a Mormon church, whatever type of church or spiritual gathering it is. But when we do kirtana, there's something about the magic and the number of the people. So I can do ceremony here at home and do my mantras, my prayers, my songs, my art, whatever type of bhakti that I'm moved to do. But when we move into a group setting, sometimes some really incredible things happen.
And so, just to sort of be clear, Vandana is sort of paying homage through song and dance in a personal sense, whereas Kirtana implies a group setting.
Well, it could be. So, when we take a look at Vandana, it could be simply taking a pilgrimage to a temple and paying your respects and offerings. It could be visiting a tree where we give honor to the grandmother earth. It could be just paying our respects. Whereas Kirtana, it's almost always you've got a harmonium, drums going. It's more of an ecstatic group celebration.
Okay. And so, where were we here? Okay, so where we're up until now, we've sort of been talking about specific methods of bhakti or specific ways that people could incorporate bhakti into their life. Or the next little section here is a form of bhakti called Atma Nivadana, when a person completely surrenders their life actions to the Supreme. And you say, this is also compared to the concept of Isavara Pranidhana in the 8 limbs of yoga. Imagine a life lived in constant, sincere aspiration to experience God through meditation and every mundane action. Bhakti is a path with so many other nuances when approached through. Oh, maybe I'm going a little too far ahead there. So, and it says, imagine a life lived in constant, sincere aspiration to experience God through meditation and every mundane action. So, what we're talking about here is, I guess, taking bhakti or taking your devotion to a place where you seek to make every action and interaction with the divine, or that every moment of the day and every aspect of life is devoted unto God or the divine.
Yeah. And we can look at that concept from everything we do, from waking up in the morning, seeing the divinity in the rising sun, to drinking our glass of water and giving thanks to offering food as seva, to doing our physical fitness specifically to house God within us, to do work as karma yoga, to take care of animals or other people as a form of seva, and to try to make every single activity we do dedicated towards either our dharma, our karma, our moksha, and these concepts in yoga of truly surrendering our lives to obtaining our highest form of spiritual emanation possible. And that's, even people will ask, well, what about the hard times? What about when I'm going through hardships? And, we even offer that up to certain forms of intelligence to be transmuted and to be turned in, a poison turned into a nectar. So it's really this process of surrendering everything, not just song, not just prayer, not just um, when we're in our beautiful white clothes, ready to do ceremony, but offering up even the hard parts of our life and offering up just the basic stuff. When we're doing gardening, not just thinking, oh, now I have to do weeding. We're servicing nature at that time, or not thinking, oh, now I got to let the dogs out. We are being of service to another being. So, really, for me, at one point when I started considering bhakti, when we take into consideration at every waking moment that everything we see is part of the same emanation of God, then we start interacting with all human beings in a different way, interacting with nature in a different way, and interacting with animals and ourselves in a different way. And then that takes us also into the other forms that I briefly mentioned, padasevana, dasya, and sakya. So those would be the last three. And when we look at sevana, to be of service to another person, another animal, or nature, that is recognizing in somebody or something else the same divinity that's within ourselves. And then we take a look at other things like dasya, to serve others, which is very similar to seva, and sakya, friendship. So, bhakti can come in a lot of different forms. It doesn't have to be singing, it doesn't have to be art, it doesn't even have to necessarily be prayer in a customary setting, but we can create a God infused life when we take a look at everything in our life as an opportunity for bhakti, an opportunity for worship. Before we put the food in our mouth, to give thanks, to give gratitude, to give worship. And each person we interact with, to try to find that connection, that bhakti. But when it comes to more advanced, maybe not more advanced, or I should say more refined forms of bhakti, for myself, it really has become just a all-encompassing, engrossing process where you devote all of your actions to understanding and to emanating your highest form of divinity possible and recognizing it in other people.
Yeah, I really can relate to what you were saying in that any action that we take as an opportunity for bhakti, or any experience, if we look at it through that lens, that all things are part of the divine and all experiences are part of the divine, and it might not be as easy to find devotion in, doing your chores or cleaning the bathroom or whatever, but there is a sort of an aspect of bhakti in all of those things that go into maintaining our our physical world, and maintaining our bodies and our spaces, and or as you were saying earlier about, like, you can look at letting the dogs out as a chore, or look at it as an opportunity to help another being, or the same as walking the dogs, right? Like, when, like, I am a dog lover and enthusiast and a dog walker and dog trainer, so I very much look forward to taking dogs on a walk, right? It's one of the most exciting parts of my day, because it's one of the most exciting parts of their day as well, right? And especially in a situation like that, where we are directly a caregiver, or in service of a person, or of a thing in some manner, um, to do it with joy, or to do it with the right, with the right sort, coming from the right place, or in your heart, of truly serving, because in devotion, not serving out of obligation or something, right? Like, because for me, and I know that you agree that seva or service is a very important aspect of your personal bhakti, or your personal practice, and you go out of your way to offer free classes and free events for people and for the community and your followers, um and yeah, I think that there is, it, as you were saying, maybe it's easier to see the beauty in beautiful songs and dance, and the more obvious aspects of devotion in your life, but then there's a different sort of beauty in finding the bhakti in those other aspects of life that maybe don't seem as outwardly devotional, if we look at them from the strictly mundane sense, right? Or if we don't, or when we look at things uh, without trying to see the divine, as you were saying. So making every interaction with every person and everything, and going into the garden and touching the ground and the earth, and acknowledging that we can live a life of bhakti in in a much more varied sense, and in all sorts of ways other than we might traditionally think.
Yeah. I think that that's where some people kind of fall short in their sadhana, is they think that they're only doing bhakti or a bhakti sadhana when they're sitting on their mat with the proper candle lit, with the proper incense lit, with the proper mantra at the proper time on the proper day. And that's excellent. However, is it filling them with that nectar, that love, that overflowing joy? I could do a sadhana, let's say a mantra sadhana, the exact same time for 120 days straight, but receive more of the nectar of bhakti from one individual act that is not on a yoga mat or a meditation pillow or sitting in front of a proper altar space, whatever proper altar space means to everybody. So we have to really open ourselves up to the different ideas and concepts and avenues of bhakti, and not think it's only one specific thing. I think that's where we really can open up the gates for people to see different ways of accessing that connection to divinity, because that's what it is. It's about that connection, that communing, that feedback between you and divinity, and then if we also want to take a look at our motives for doing that, and that's the section that I wrote here on the 4 different types of motives for bhakti. So in the Bhagavad Gita, they say, those who seek shelter in me, O Arjuna, are 4 types: those who are in distress, those who seek understanding, those who seek power, and those who are wise. And so when we are doing these different forms of bhakti, are we doing it out of pure love and desire for connection, or are we doing it because we're distressed? Some people, they say nobody prays until something's wrong. Or are we doing it for answers? Because many times our prayers or our bhakti include seeking knowledge or answers. Other people, it is to develop powers or siddhis or boons, something that they want. They have a request. And then the other is simply for the sake of love. And that is the most powerful, because we can just use our connection to divinity like a slot machine only when we have something we want to ask for, or something we want to learn, or something we want to resolve. But that's a taking. It's a requesting. It's a going to divinity and saying, I want something from you, rather than the bhakta, or the person who's involved in bhakti, who's just pouring out love. So it's a negative take. Not that it's negative or bad. You're either asking from or taking from divinity, or giving to divinity. And even when we look at people in general in our lives, the people who I interact with on a regular basis, if every time I interact with them, they want something from me, tell me this, teach me this, give me this, fix this for me, make it so that I can do this, that's fine. But eventually, that's tiring. Whereas if I interact with somebody, let's say Coco here, my dog, half the time she's just sitting there looking at me in adoration with this silly, loving look on her face. So when we look at our own relationship to bhakti, are we asking for, requesting, or are we giving love? And I believe that the more love we put out into our bhakti, the more stillness that we feel. Because when we're operating out of bhakti because something is wrong, eventually our act of bhakti may resolve that vritti, or that disturbance, something's wrong. And so then we seek solace. Or when we want answers, or when we want things, empowerments. But when we're doing bhakti purely out of the intention of connecting and expressing love, when we sing like a child, when we dance for no good reason, when that love overcomes us, then I believe that the union is even stronger.
No, that makes absolute sense, right? Because me, bhakti being love and devotion, you don't think of love as expecting love in return, right? It just is. When you think of unconditional love or something, that's like a loaded term, or like makes me think about high school English class or something when you hear unconditional love. But it's true when if someone only comes knocking when they need something, it's sort of telling about your relationship. And so whether that is when they're in distress or when they're looking for something, and it goes back to a conversation I had with, I'm trying to remember who I was speaking to recently, but it was actually Sri Vijayanath, my teacher within the International Nath Order, and we were talking about like sort of the idea of setting yourself up for success in your practice and everything. And What were we just speaking about in relation to Bhakti? I was trying to think about where I was having the conversation, and then I spaced for a second. We're
We're moving towards like loving for love's sake.
mhm. And yeah, it'll come to me in a second. But that's true. Like that love for love's sake, or love isn't, expecting something in return, and that
Mhm.
when you sit down uh, for your sadhana and you are going to, recite mantra or do whatever devotion, and that your intention in being there, and that is obviously your devotional time, but then there's also an aspect of being able to bring your devotion to uh, every aspect of your life, right? And so we should seek to both live our daily life in a way that it is creating a feedback loop when we sit down to practice, and we should practice in such a way, I guess, that we're also setting ourselves up to create the life that, or to be the person that we want to be in the world when we go out into the world. And when you start to create that relationship between your inner self and your outer world, then I guess that is the true bhakti that we're seeking, like not a bhakti with aim, so to speak.
Yeah. And that's also important when we take a look at, like we said, the intention for it. But when the intention for bhakti is to get a result that you want, it's still not as pure as just bhakti for love's sake.
And let me see. After that, and so, yeah, you're saying on the idea of singing like a child and dancing like the wind, create a life that reflects the love of God emanating through you. And you have another lovely quote from the Bhagavad Gita that you finished the article with, that I guess I'll just go ahead and read now. And it says, "Those who with minds fix on me are ever united to me in pure devotion are in my eyes the best versed in yoga. Those, however, who aspire to the indestructible, in indescribable, the unmanifested, the all pervading, the incomprehensible, the immutable above all vibration, who have subjugated the senses, are even minded, and devote themselves to the well being of all, verily they too attain me." Um, and so I guess that verse is just describing just that, saying, or in saying, those who attain me, or being Krishna, or the light of divinity, however you want to put it, um, are those who essentially surrender themselves unto living a life of devotion.
And I think that it's important also to look at the statement even minded, that when you become immersed in devotion, that the mind becomes less afflicted by, we could call them the negative vitiations if we want to, things like jealousy, anger, fear, depression. Um, and when we throw our mind into bhakti, our mind becomes even, where it becomes still. And we know that we need this process to occur before we can go into states of samadhi. We need that mind to be firmly fixated and still on one thing, onto the obtainable goal. versus the mind being, the trees full of monkeys and unable to stay focused on anything, or jumping from fear of failure to, desire for all these different types of things. When you just relinquish it all to bhakti,
Mhm.
and you just don't have as many of those abnormalities of the mind that you have to control. There's less to control because you're controlling your mind by fixing it on divinity.
Right. And so, I guess as we were moving on through the article, I wanted to make it partially, or I wanted to make the podcast partially about just bhakti in general, and then sort of begin talking about, I guess, your specific approach to bhakti while I have you here, just because I've been wanting sort of an excuse to share your devotional artwork with my followers and some of my favorites from your music and everything. So, is there anything, I guess, about bhakti in general that we haven't covered at this point before we start getting into sort of more specific ideas of how you go about incorporating bhakti into your daily life and how bhakti ends up being expressed through you in your daily life? And
Yeah, we can move to that next segment.
okay, so I guess at this point, I've prepared a little page which I'll be publishing to the blog probably before this ever makes it to YouTube. So everyone will be able to find it at the bottom of Kalavati's article on Bhakti, the most sacred love. And so I'm just going to share my screen here for a moment so that I can show you all a little selection of my personal favorites of Kalavati's recent um, devotional artwork and music. So I'm just going to get the page up here. All right. I'm halfway down the page here. So can everyone see my screen here?
I see part of it up. It looks like a black screen so far.
Okay, maybe it'll just take a second to load.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, great. Yeah, my computer seems to be having trouble with the share screen function for some reason. Okay, so here's just a little selection of my favorite devotional art, music, and writing from my good friend Kalavati Devi here. And I started off with this kind of, I don't want to say silly, but the picture I just really enjoyed of your Kali statue here. Some beautiful flowers in the front and then the lime impaled on the trishul. So I just thought I would begin with that one because I always really enjoy seeing the pictures that you will send or that you'll post with your statuary and your beautiful devotional spaces that you'll set up. And so, and then following this, we're going to see, I guess, just sort of a slew of my favorites that I've been saving of your recent devotional drawings. So for anyone who doesn't follow Christie or Kalavati Devi through her website, healthiervibrations.com, she'll often post daily. She draws pictures or writes little poems, and she will post them, and they're often really evocative images of priestesses or serpents and mandalas and just all of these sort of inspiring devotional images that I've saved my favorites of here. So we'll just get into it. This is a kind of recent one that I love. It is a Kali priestess here, looking kind of very traditional like Kali. I love the skirt of arms, and they're reaching down and touching the Shiva lingam that's coming up out of the ground. And I could probably have chosen a selection of just your images like this, of just the that style of Kali priestess that you send me often. I very much love, but this one sort of struck me recently. Then we have this fine specimen here. This lady, she's quite endowed with serpents, right? And when I was teaching my Kundalini lecture last year, I have this image that I drew of Rudra, and or the old Shiva, and it seems like you'll notice in images of Shiva, the older that he looks in age, like Rudra has less and less clothes, less and less jewelry, and more snakes as he gets older. Like so yeah, plenty of snakes here. This one I really love. I found really evocative. I don't know, you do a lot of sort of strange close-up portrait-esque kind of pictures like that, with the eyes wide and wild and the big stuck-out tongue like Kali. And then maybe we can talk about this one for a minute. I wanted to just bring up the fact that it really sort of I find it a very evocative image that sort of shows your the broad span of influence that goes into your writing and your artwork. And I just love the sigillic face of what I was just describing, that you'll make these sort of almost self-portraits that are of this priestess who is, eyes wide and wild like Kali, and tongue stuck out. And yeah, this one really just struck me. So do you want to maybe stop there and talk for a minute just about those few pictures that are brought up and the ones that you tend to do in that sort of theme?
Sure, sure. So this one that you have showing on the screen right now, the drawing, this was back when I was doing studies on Vivs. So, we have yantras, and then sometimes we have depictions of different intelligences through Vivs. And so this one was, I don't want to say a dream I had, but a vision that I had of taking the image of Kali and having the Viv transposed onto her face. s- So that I remember when I drew this, it was this integrational time in my life where Kali, who's my Ishta Devata, was so immensely visual in my life, and everything that I saw was just transposed on. So this is actually a Papa Legba Viv transposed onto the image of Kali.
Wow, yeah, that's really fascinating. I love the way that it turned out, right? Or just when I look into the eyes, I can sort of, it feels like it draws you into that space that it was created within, as I was saying earlier. Um, that's awesome. Thank you. And here we have another one. This one I think is fairly recent, right? And I just sort of had to throw it in there with that whole uh, sort of collage. And then here, this is just a piece, one of a few um, little pieces that you've shared from different sort of devotional texts that you'll make. Like you've had a number of unpublished writings and texts and little book books that you will make, that, and you've sent me a couple of them. And this one here, I guess, is this the insert from the booklet that came with your recent Kelly Samadhi album?
The one that's on the screen right now was published in the Pyre zine. So it was a
Oh, right. Wow, I've been meaning to get my hands on that, actually.
yeah, they sold it out, but they're going to have a spring one
Oh,
coming
wow, cool.
soon. So when I was working with that project, I sent quite a few different of the early on pictures that I did, and those were the two that were selected to put in there. Yeah, because my bhakti drawing from, let's say, 2 years ago to now has dramatically changed in the process and my relationship to the drawing. Sometimes, yeah, it changes quite a bit.
And so, okay, yeah, I was thinking that I was sharing something from your own booklets that I've seen in the past. I remember I do have you sent me a PDF of a book of mostly devotional poems and writing, and that was fascinating as well. You do write in a lot of different or on a lot of different subjects. And I guess I was about to scroll down there, and then I stopped myself because I saw that the next picture sort of changes it up a little bit, in that recently you have published a couple of children's books, and may not be quite as obvious a form of bhakti, but maybe, as we were saying earlier, more of a form of seva as well. And so now, having said that, I will scroll down to reveal here that you have released two books sort of more recently, I believe, both within the last couple of months, that are available at Amazon.com.
Yeah.
And the first one is Cringy Cat, Ayurveda for Children, by Christie Smirl, and the second is Brian's Unfortunate Brainstorm by Christie Smirl. And so maybe, do you want to just talk a little bit about those two releases while we're there?
Yeah, so most of my studies and practices have to do with mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. And it's very difficult, I think, sometimes to teach children different aspects of well-being without being too overly dun 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 really serious. And so I wrote Cringy Cat so that children can look at the different relationships between Ayurvedic lifestyles and foods and what is causing the mind to be abnormal or vitiated. So Cringy Cat goes into three different types of cringy. One which is kapha aggravated, one which is pitta aggravated, one which is vata aggravated. And for those who know a little bit about Ayurveda, then it also goes into asking why the child is feeling like that. And then they're able to self regulate and see, oh, this lifestyle and nutritional pattern causes this cringy type of mental pattern. And then Brian's Unfortunate Brainstorm was really focusing on giving children coping techniques in a fun, silly way. So, for instance, Brahmari pranayama is one of the techniques in the book, but of course, we don't call it Brahmari pranayama. We make it more kid friendly and simple. So, this was really a way for children to go into mental regulation and self regulation with emotion, lifestyle, and food choices. And they came out cute. I liked them. I've been doing guest author readings in um, classrooms in the area, third grade classrooms and stuff like that. We raffle off the book and we have a good time.
Well, yeah, I actually am really looking forward to getting my hands on a copy of all of your physical releases and books, really. I guess I didn't put up a picture of your Alchemical Yogini book, which is one of my favorite images that you've used in general, which is just the back of your leather jacket that's covered in studs, and then a big Kali yantra. And so yeah, but I guess everyone will just have to go to the blog and see the final form of this little page about your devotional artwork that I'm preparing here, and it will have links to one of my favorite songs from that album, which was Transitions to Ma, I believe it's called. Is that the first album that you did with Kelly Samadhi?
Mm-hmm.
And then
Transition. Wow.
yeah,
And then
and
the last one was MMXX 2020.
right, and I had chosen 2 different songs off of that album that I was going to share on the page as well. One is Om Namah Shivaya, which we'll be sharing at the end of the podcast here. And then another one is entitled COG, which I would dare say stands for Cult of Golgotha, which is a book by our friend Craig Williams, which has been quite inspirational to myself, I would dare say, my friend Kalavati Devi here as well, and a number of other people. The spirit of that book is really quite interesting in that I feel it's brought the sort of what we've been calling the cult of Golgotha to a number of people far and wide in a way, or the book and its teachings seem to have reached quite a number of people. And I look forward to having Craig on the podcast in the coming months to talk about his book, Tantric Physics, Volume 1 and 2. I'm just waiting until I get my copy and then read it before having him on the podcast so that I can know what I'm talking about. But I do very much look forward to that. And while we're talking about Craig as well, at the end of Christie's article on the blog, you will see that we have shared an hour-long video, which was originally available exclusively through her course that Craig and Kalavati offered through healthiervibrations.com, which was on the Bhagavad Gita in general, I guess. I think it was maybe a 4-part course, and this one part was on Bhakti in the Bhagavad Gita. So we're happy to be able to share that video with all of you now. So you can find that at dharmawarrior.net. And I believe that we've both recently shared it to social media, and you've shared it on healthiervibrations.com as well. So yeah, okay, so let's move on from there. I was going to say that I do have a passion for children's books and children's art. I'm working with a friend on making a book of a Mi'kmaq picture dictionary. The Mi'kmaq are the native Algonquin tribe that are native to northeastern United States and eastern Canada. And so they're native to Nova Scotia, and I will be teaching free class, warrior yoga class at the Mi'kmaq Friendship Center here in Halifax starting soon. So I'm very happy about that. And I'm going to be working with some of the youth there to make a Mi'kmaq picture dictionary, like an illustrated dictionary of animals and places and plants and people, places and things in the traditional Mi'kmaq language. So that will be fun for me.
Fun.
Let me see here. Okay, so I'm about to scroll down, and what we are going to see is an advertisement for this course that you're offering called Chakra Alignment, which is going to be happening Wednesday nights, February 3rd, 10th, 17th, and 24th at 6:30 p.m. and that's Pacific Standard Time. And so, yeah, I guess I'll just read it out. It says, join Christie Smirl nurse practitioner, Ayurvedic practitioner, for a free online class series using the workbook Chakra Alignment, a transformational guide and journal to reclaim control over your chakras and life. Learn how to reprogram your subtle body, gain stability and resilience. And then there's a Zoom link there. So it says more details at Healthier Vibrations Learning Center. So you can find that at healthiervibrations.com. Is there anything that you want to say about those upcoming events, which I am certainly going to be attending personally?
Yeah, this one, I have a lot of friends and associates who bought my recent chakra alignment book, but the book was put together more for a guide, a journal, a self-transformational process. So I'm going to be hosting 4 classes. That way people can really start digging down into it, because it's one thing to learn about your subtle anatomy, your panchakoshas, your chakras. It's one thing to study yourself and what you think needs to be adjusted or transformed within you. But it's another thing to sit down and make very specific, beautiful, rich ceremony to do those meditations for yourself, to really dive into the process of ritual meditation or bhakti to yourself even, and to really create that environment. So those 4 classes, we're going to be doing that. The first class, I'll be going over, mostly the information and how to set things up. And then the next 3 after that will make an environment where people can really get their practice done, because it's 1% theory. All the rest is practice and work. If we want to transform ourselves, we have to do the work. Yeah, so anybody can join those classes.
Okay, great. Yeah, and so I'll post a more direct link to that on my site as well. And I hope to see some of my friends there. I'm certainly going to be attending. Yeah. Wednesday nights are good for me typically. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Let me see here. And so it is a Wednesday night tonight, but tomorrow being Thursday, the full moon, you are offering in another form of seva this full moon fire ceremony, January 28th at 8 p.m. PST, Pacific Standard Time. Join Kalavati Devi for a purifying fire ritual this full moon. Joined by a Zoom and set up your own ritual space to recite 108 Mryatunja mantra. Pardon my mispronunciation there.
Yeah,
Free.
this is something I'm going to try to do a little bit more often, is fire ceremony. Because, oops, thing's beeping at my door. But this is going to be tomorrow night, and it's a little bit late in the evening because I have other classes that I'm doing. Oh, give me just a second.
Yeah, absolutely. My dogs want out as well. So why don't you, yeah, we'll just join up in a sec.
Give me just a second.
Can you out for a sec, boy?
All right, thanks for that. Somebody's ringing my doorbell and the dogs are going nuts.
No problem there. I just let my dogs out for a second there as well. And so
So I'm working on offering a little bit more often of these types of ceremonies so people can join and kind of demystify them a bit. And for this upcoming Thursday, since it's a full moon, we'll begin with greetings and salutations to Ganesha first, and then we'll do 108 of the Mahamrityunjayas. And even if people don't have a fire pit or an ability to interact with the fire portion, they can just interact with the mantra portion, or they can just listen even. They don't have to have the whole mantra memorized.
Okay, the dogs are back inside. Perfect. Okay, so great. Yeah, I really look forward to that as well. I am going to tune into that. It is a little bit past my bedtime, typically, where with the time difference, it will be midnight on my side of America here. But that's okay. I can stay up a little bit late for your full moon fire ceremony once in a little while, you know. So I look forward to that as well. And so yeah, that will be great tomorrow. I will have my own little full moon obligation a little earlier in the evening, but I will be quite delighted to join you for that. So let me see here. I guess that I believe maybe brings us, yeah, to the end of the images that I had prepared there. I was going to share a few more images of your things like that you share of your ritual space and your cooking and things like that. And we were talking earlier about those sort of maybe more mundane forms of bhakti, and I meant to stop on food and cooking for a moment, and I didn't. We got onto something else, so I would like to maybe stop there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we could maybe talk about just for a moment your love for food and food as a form of bhakti, and cooking, and you share such beautiful looking dishes, and so maybe we can speak about that, about the expression of bhakti through cooking and domestic aspects of bhakti, maybe.
Yeah. So, when I prepare a meal, first of all, we want to take into consideration our Ayurvedic balance. What season is it? What is our constitution? Are we imbalanced? And how does the preparation of proper food nutrition affect our own spiritual vessel? If we are imbalanced in our food intake, we understand through the study of Charaka Samhita, the texts of Charaka and Ayurveda, that there's four main types of insanity. And if one of our biggest goals is spiritual evolution, but yet we are on the brink of insanity, we need to take a look at how we're preparing our food, how we're digesting our food, and how we're selecting our food. Because if four types of insanity are caused by food and lifestyle, our first form of bhakti to yoking is to make sure that we are eating properly, that we are digesting our food properly. Otherwise, we have vitiations of the mind, which may not be fixable through bhakti, of just doing chanting, etc. So, when we take a look at our physical vessel, we understand that this is a divine vessel. This is where divinity lives. This is where God is emanating through us. And so, what we eat should also be offered to that yoking process. Although it's not too uncommon to find prasad on altars when we offer food to the divine, or to an altar space, or when we place it in front of us and we pray over it first, or we chant over it first, and then we eat it, or we share it. A lot of times my food gets shared with my little fur babies as well, or my family. And that is an act of bhakti in and of itself. But we also have to take a look at what is our mindset when we eat, Are we just throwing the food together and like, whatever, I'm just hungry, I gotta eat something, and then we're thinking about all these negative things while we're eating? That's gonna affect our digestion. That's gonna affect our entire, cellular chemistry. Whereas if we are looking at our food and preparing it with the idea of preparing it for the divine. Let's just take an example. Let's say you invited Ganesh to your house in physical form, okay, in real life form. And you said, Ganesh, at 6 o'clock, would you like to come over to my house? I'm going to be singing songs and burning incense and lighting candles and offering food too. Would you offer just a plate of food that looks like hell? And then while your company is trying to eat, you're sitting there saying things like, and then I had a horrible day and this and this and that. That's terrible food conversation. So when we sit down to eat, be the hostess with the mostess and host divinity while you're eating. Make it looking at it like, oh, Ganesh would love this. Kali would love this. It's beautiful. And even if it's not the best quality food or the best ingredients or the best tasting, make it with bhakti. Eat it with bhakti. Digest it with bhakti. Rather than the alternative, which are the vitiations of the mind. Make it with anger, eat it with anger, digest it with anger. No. Make it with bhakti, eat it with bhakti, digest it with bhakti in mind.
No, that's beautiful. I love it. And that is one thing that I have been trying to keep in mind when I am preparing my food and when I'm gardening, even, and when I go to cook a meal, or when I sit down to eat a meal, or even when I'm preparing the dog's meals. I am taking into consideration that all of that energy and love that's put into our food and the preparation of it goes into nourishing us and nourishing the consumer, and that it I guess there are certain forms of yogis, like say like Brahmin priests for instance, only ever eat food that is prepared by a Brahmin chef and that was grown in a garden very specifically, and from the very process of growing the food and harvesting it and preparing it, it's all done with love and devotion. And I remember hearing somewhere it was actually a person by the name of Raghunath, who he was in a band called Shelter, a hardcore band, I guess, from New York in the 1980s, I guess it would have been. And he was part of what was known, I guess, as the Krishna core movement, and and the Hare Krishna movement in within hardcore music. And he was on Joe Rogan's podcast talking about that, talking about how even when they were on tour, that they would not eat in restaurants or anything, that they would prepare their food on the side of the road in a very specific manner, because they were just used to living the life of a monk and they only prepared and ate food in a specific way. And I personally, I found that interesting. But anyway, I was just trying to get to saying that there is a certain aspect of just that bhakti or devotion that can be put into all of those mundane tasks of putting your clothes on in the morning and preparing your meals, and cleaning your house and making your bed. It all goes into building the life that we're making, and setting the stage for how we interact with our environment and what we make with this life and this energy that we're given. So in that way, uh, we should seek to live more of a life of bhakti or devotion, and as yogis or as spiritual seekers or what have you. And so, yeah, it's good to, as we were saying at the beginning of the podcast, you can get caught up in technicalities and ritual and scriptures and all of these things, especially as a new person coming to yoga or coming to spirituality. It can be overwhelming, right? And I think that one of the most important things is just finding the way that you personally connect to divinity and connect to your practice and what makes you feel whole and what makes you feel alive, and to just incorporate more of that into your life. And eventually, if you do that with a whole heart, and you devote your life to your practice or to your love for life or the divine or God or whatever you want to call it, or whatever brings you joy and lights that fire within you, then you'll find that our joy in that way is like a guiding mechanism towards what we should be looking to bring more of into our experience and into our life, right? Because we can live in such a way that we seek to find more of that sacred space and create more of that sacred space, or just not, I guess. And
And as yogis, if our main goal is to always yoke, we want to try to find every possible moment to yoke, to be in constant union with divinity as often as possible, even when things are not favorable, even when the food is not favorable, even when the circumstances not favorable, quote
right,
unquote, not favorable. Can we still ascertain that connection, that yoking in good times and bad times and preferred situations and unpreferred situations? Can we let go of the gripping and the griping to the circumstance and constantly find the divinity, that connection, that yoking in that every waking breath? From the moment your eyes wake up in the morning, the first breath that you consciously take out of sleep, the last breath that you consciously take before you go to sleep. Can we try to find as much opportunity as possible in every second to connect with divinity, or to be a living emanation of divinity where possible at all times?
yeah. And for me, what that brings to mind is one of the biggest lessons that I took from the Bhagavad Gita, which is that we need to find, begin to see the divine in all things, not just in the times when we are great crass mode, by the way. um, uh, that we need to start to see the divine in difficult times as well, and not only when it is obvious, right? And so that sort of brings us to that point in the Bhagavad Gita when uh, the classic moment when Krishna says, "Arise, Arjuna," because he is unable to see the where you get what I'm getting at. That it's like that Arjuna need. They go into this dialogue throughout the whole Bhagavad Gita, where it's like, no, you can find me in all of these situations. I am there, and there's joy, and there is beauty, and even in the darkest times, there is a light. There's hope. There is some form of, if you look at things with the right eyes, there Krishna is there, or, right? Like, and it may not always be easy, and it may not always be those moments when you feel divinely blessed and you feel so connected, but there is that potential for connection there always, right?
Yeah. Always, always. I know for, growing up, my most early remembrances or paranormal experiences with divinity was during time of distress. And that was a little bit hard for me to sort out later on in life. But eventually I realized that my deepest connection to divinity or my Ishta Devata was during times of distress. And so it's one thing to be able to offer bhakti when everything is hunky dory and going well, when all circumstances are in our favor, when the candles are just right and the lighting is just right and the murti is dressed just right and the prasad looks just right. But what about when everything goes to hell in a handbasket? That's the test of bhakti.
Mhm.
Can you find your pathway to express bhakti when everything is going not according to plan, when things are in upheaval, when you're going into that battle? Because really, what is the battle about?
Yeah, and that is a great way of looking at it. Like, what is that battle about? It's about being able to be what you know you want to be in all situations, right? And it's always easy to be, or it's obviously easier to be your ideal self when it's easy than when it's hard, right? Like, so, but um yeah, there's and I keep coming back in my mind to the idea, some ideas, again from Craig's work with the idea of this, the creating the sacred space or whatever. When I read Entering the Desert, one of the most important concepts in it that I just felt, I was like, wow, like people, it just really needed to be stripped down to that basic language, the way that he puts it in that book, that like no matter how you spell it out, if you are looking to have a life of devotion, you have to create uh, the time and the space to have a life of devotion. And you need to at least make a little space in your house and put a candle there and light the candle once in a while and look into it and say, what am I doing and what energy am I putting into this and creating? And that brings me around kind of to what I was thinking, or trying, the thought I was trying to come to earlier. And it was about the idea of setting ourselves up for success in our practice, and you know the you can't really lie to God or to the divine, right? Like when you come to when you enter prayer, and as Krishna is saying in the Bhagavad Gita, there's four type of people or whatever, right? And when you come, or there's four reasons that people, sorry, come to God in asking for something, right? They're either coming in distress, um, or looking for is something, or looking for powers, or they're coming in wisdom, and or seeking wisdom. And so, from a Christian perspective or something, it doesn't make much sense to go out sinning all day and then go home and try to pray it away at night or something, right? Like, because you can sort of lie to yourself in the moment and pretend that you're living one way, but then like that you're just going home and watching Netflix and doing the same thing everyone else is doing at night or something, right? And that's an issue. And I don't like to rip on anyone specifically, but so I won't, I guess. But we'll just say that in different communities, you'll see people who will get up on their high horse and say like, "Oh, I'm this and I'm that, and I'm this fancy thing and that fancy thing, and I wear this robe and put these pictures on the internet," but then they don't live any different of a life. So what does it boil down to at that point, right? And what is a reason for
All
bhakti
that.
and a reason for devotion? And is it for this egoic sort of sense, or do we have like a genuine approach to our practice? And so we
I
sort of
call
have to
that
ask ourselves these things.
spiritual posturing.
Hmm.
You
And
know,
then,
and I was also thinking of another analogy as you were speaking. Let's say that somebody wants to court and date somebody. Okay. You want to win over somebody's love. Let's just say it's a guy trying to get a lady to fall in love, right? Do you invite them over and serve them the worst food that you have available? No. Do you invite them over into a sloppy pig pen house? Well, maybe, but might not impress her. Do you, once you get her into your company, do you then ignore her and do something else? Do you, interact with a true sense of wanting to yoke with that person? Or are you trying to take something from that person? And it's the same thing when we do bhakti. The more we practice bhakti, quote unquote, how do you practice bhakti? I don't know if that's even quite a term that I'm comfortable with, practicing bhakti. But sometimes people need to practice their focus on bhakti. Let's say you decide, okay, I'm going to put my harmonium out and I'm going to get my mantras out and I'm going to light a candle, and then squirrel, I'm distracted doing something else. That's like inviting somebody over and then getting distracted in another room and forgetting they were even there. Or when we sit down to do our spiritual practices and we start calling out the names of divinity, calling out the holy names, are we doing it with a depth of passion within us, or are we doing it just kind of cursory? So let's say we invite this lady over, right? And we're like this, Christie, Christie, I'm so glad you came over. And then 10 minutes later, completely distracted doing something else. We have to fix our mind on our process of bhakti. We have to constantly aim for the highest form of offering to the divinity in everything we do. It doesn't take complex rituals, it takes focus of the mind. Like your dog. Your dog is focused right now. Your dog's like this. I love you. I see you. I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you.
He's focused on the fact that he usually eats at around 5 or 5:30 and it's knocking on 6. But yeah.
Like I know my dog, she'll sit there, and everywhere I go, every time I turn around, she's still sitting there looking at me. I'm like, well, hello, how are you? You're so cute.
Yeah. There's one more just off camera here that's got his peepers on me as well. But we'll be wrapping up sooner than later.
They're in adoration. Yeah, true. They may want something, but they're in adoration.
No, it's true.
And we want to try to do this process of bhakti as often as possible, with as many activities as possible, with as many thoughts as possible. Every thought we have, can we fix it in the form of bhakti? Every action we do, can we try to place it in alignment with bhakti?
Mhm.
And when we do that, life changes completely. The unnecessary things begin to fade away from us, and we start feeling the flow of that rasa more and more and more. It starts enlivening our senses and enlivening our cells when we do this.
Mhm. And yeah, and that is really the sort of bread and butter of spiritual devotion, is like what we're talking about, is just getting down to the point of finding how you can just bring more and more of the divine into your life and make your life into more and more of a constant state of yoga or union with the divine. And so I think that, yeah, there are all infinite number of ways that a person could express their own sort of love of the divine or devotional devotional love. And we've covered a lot of ground. And I guess, is there anything that you wanted to talk about outside of that? Like, we've covered sort of the traditional bhakti from a traditional sense, and from our own sort of points of view. And I think
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot. I think the most important thing is that people find their own path, their own way, their own passion for divinity, because the body is going to be left behind.
mhm,
This is just a vessel of flesh. And when we are able to connect into that unlimited, undying energy,
mhm.
life changes.
And unbridled too, right? Like, I think that an important aspect that of something I remember that came up in conversation between us is the idea of just not putting up, or just having a form of bhakti that is totally unhindered, right? Like, you're drawing, you said that you sit
Yeah.
down and you let yourself just go, and you don't, and
Yeah, I think this is an important concept because if I sit down to do a drawing, usually it's inspired. And then if I sit down and my mind is too involved in the process, oh, but she looks like this or looks like this, then the drawing becomes difficult. My mind space becomes difficult. It becomes a strain. It's no longer joyous to do it. But if I just relinquish any thoughts of what the drawing is going to look like or how it's going to come out, it doesn't matter if people like it or don't like it. I'm just allowing it to flow through. It's like when a child does a drawing for a parent, a kind parent will say, "Oh, this is beautiful. Tell me more about it." Whereas if the child has become too engrossed in the thought of whether or not you will or won't like it takes away from the child's joy in making it. Same thing with music. When I sit down to do bhakti in the form of kirtana or mantra or bhajan, it's much easier for me to do it when nobody's around because I don't want to worry about what the humans will think my
mhm,
song sounds like. I don't want to worry about whether or not the humans think my voice is in key or, my fingers hit the right notes. I can lose myself into a much deeper ecstatic state when I'm isolated away from other humans and in a form of solitude in just communing with the divine. So I think it's just really important, to wrap things up that people need to find their own passion. What are they passionate about? Where do they seek the divine? Where do they find the divine? Where do they feel the divine? Is it in nature? Is it with animals? Is it with humans? Is it through song, dance, art, creation, service, food? Where is their connection? And for them to also be under the guidance of a guru who can help them find that centered ecstaticness, because sometimes the divine can whisk us off into some pretty unusual pockets, and we need to have the guidance of a guru to keep us stable and pointed in the right direction.
mhm. Yeah, I find for myself, just having anyone else involved in my practice, whether it's a student or a teacher or just someone else there, I notice myself getting into the posture if I'm teaching asana, I'm getting into the postures more properly, and my breath is more proper. And it's in those moments I'm like, wow, okay, I allow myself to slack in my sadhana sometimes because I know there's no one watching, quote unquote, or whatever, right? Or I catch myself in those moments when there are people watching that I'm like, oh, like my back just like cracked a couple times. I sat up a little straighter than normal there because I know that I'm being an example or something like that, right?
Well,
But
and I think what's really important along that line is that they are watching. The spirits are watching at all times. when you sit down and you ring the Ganesha bell and you say, Ekadantaya vidmahe vakratundaya dimahi tano dantihi prachotayat.
Mhm.
They are watching.
Oh, and I know that, right? It's just that it's more obvious when they're watching through some human eyes too.
Right? But we really want to take that bhakti from the standpoint that, even when we're by ourselves, we've invited them through our consciousness. Now be a good hostess or
Hmm.
host. Really show the love, radiate the love, rather than going through empty actions or empty motions.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I feel like we have spoken a lot about various aspects of bhakti and the various ways that you can approach bhakti, and um, I guess we can sort of begin wrapping it up here. I did want to share that the one song with our listeners and viewers here from my little selection of your devotional songs that I was hoping you could play, because your computer seems to be a little better at sharing the screen while playing a video at the same time. So this is
Oh,
just a track from MMXX, the newest Kali Samadhi album, which just came out in late 2020, and this track is called Om Namah Shivaya. Um,
actually looks like my screen share on my end is disabled.
oh no. Okay.
So
Well, in
that's
that
all right.
case, yeah, we don't have to do that. There's going to be the links to those three videos in the blog post at dharmawarrior.net, and you can all read Kalavati's article there, and I will have a link at the end of the video here so that you can go ahead and listen to those songs from Kalavati's YouTube channel at the end of the video here. And I guess I'll just say thank you to everyone for joining us here today for the latest episode of the Dharma Warrior podcast. And however you're watching or listening, or if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell and like and share and all of those things. And um, I'm happy to have you all hear this, and thank you for joining us again today for the latest installment of our Yoga Life Transformation Beyond Fitness series that we're going to be doing together, and we look forward to bringing you more installments of that. And is there anything that you wanted to say in closing,
Nope,
Kalavati Devi?
that's it. Thank you for having me on, and I hope everybody finds their own pocket of bhakti that makes sense and brings them that deliciousness of life.
Perfect. Om Namah Shivaya and Namaste, and I will see you tomorrow night for your full moon fire ritual.
Fantastic. I'll see you then. Take care.
Perfect. Okay, you as well. Namaste, and thanks everyone.